Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Ed Hernandez. He is a member of the California State Senate. And sir, you are taking a very, very bold step. As we know, the voters in the 1990s, I believe, passed Proposition 209, which banned the use of race, gender, color, creed in really any decision by a public entity, including education, including employment. What we know is that since Prop 209, enrollment figures in our public universities have been quite low when we look at communities of color. You're looking to change that.
Yes.
Talk to us about SCA 5.
Well, what it's going to do is, if it gets out of the assembly, it will go to the people to ask that question again, to see if they're willing to address that issue, to allow the universities of this state to use race as a factor.
And gender.
And gender.
So let's be as specific as possible and talk about the history of what has happened with this constitutional amendment, its proposal. It's been through various houses at various times over the last few years. This year, this cycle, the Senate did pass it out with a 2/3 vote.
Correct.
That's a tremendous margin, and to get it out was quite an accomplishment for you. It's now going to the Assembly, and if the Assembly votes it out with 2/3, it goes back to the voters.
Correct.
It doesn't need to go to the governor.
No. That is correct.
The Democrats do hold a 2/3 majority in both houses, and presumably you might be able to get it passed out of the Assembly. What do you see?
Well, I'm not taking it for granted. Even though there is a 2/3 majority, I believe it's still going to be a controversial issue, and I need to lobby each one of the members so that they understand the merits of the measure.
And there's no question, sir, that this measure is so charged on so many levels. Whenever you talk about race, there is a general feeling of fear. I mean, people are almost afraid to have the conversation.
I agree.
And so, you know, intuitively, many of us believe we should just be judged by the hard, cold numbers. Why do you believe that maybe that's not the whole story?
Well, you're right. Anytime we deal or discuss race, it gets blown out of proportion. But here's the reason why. Since Proposition 209 was passed, there was a huge precipitous drop of underrepresented minorities that were accepted to the UC systems.
And what's interesting, if I may, sir, is that some folks may not realize the community that saw the largest drop was not the Latino community, it was the African-American community. Those numbers just plummeted way below their proportion of the population.
Correct. But the other thing that's interesting is, if you look at our university system, the master plan that was set up throughout the state of California specifically says that it must reflect the diversity of the state of California. The diversity of the state of California in the 50s and the 60s looks a lot different than it looks today.
Well, and if you look at our public institutions today, we see disproportionate numbers of Asian Americans on college campuses, not in proportion to their representation in the population of California. And so that gives us even more stomach aches, because how do we deal with that? I mean, that's a underrepresented group vis-a-vis the European population, but why are they able to be admitted at such high levels?
Well, but it's not all just, there's other forms of Asians that are underrepresented, the Hmongs, the Filipinos. So what I'm saying is, what we need to do is to allow the universities to go after the best and the brightest of all segments of our population, and to use race as a factor, not as, the
U.S. Supreme Court has been they've issued several rulings on this. And as we speak today, what we know is the Supreme Court has said that institutions can consider race as a factor. It has not been outlawed entirely, although some wonder whether this court will outlaw the consideration of race as a factor. But at the same time, where do we go with the fundamental question of how to consider race as a factor?
Well, as you mentioned, the courts have ruled that you can consider, albeit in a narrow margin, which means that you cannot have quotas, You cannot have preferential treatment. But what you can do is use it in the form of recruiting to go after the best and the brightest. Because we're losing those kids to the private schools. They're going away.
They're allowed to use race as a factor.
Yeah, so there's a huge disadvantage that the UCs have. And there's an even bigger disparity amongst the flagship schools like UC Berkeley and UCLA. Because don't we want the best and the brightest to come? And I'm not saying to allow somebody to come in that is not qualified. That is not what I'm asking, and that's not what I'm proposing. What I'm saying is to allow the UCs to go after the best and the brightest kids of color, bring them in to assimilate, because diversity only makes our state better.
At the same time, a lot of what we're dealing with may not be ethnicity, but socioeconomic status. And so it begs the question, and I'd love to hear your response, is diversity for diversity's sake a valuable element on a campus? I mean, do we want the rich ethnic kid to be part of this type of program when that rich ethnic kid received as many attributes and preferences as the European kid?
We need to have a cadre of diversity, from the rich ethnic kid to the poor ethnic kid who's just as bright or has the same capacity to achieve, because it makes us a richer society. If you look at California, how it is now compared to the 50s, we look a lot different, we act a lot different, and the country is moving in that direction. And we need to learn to make sure that our higher educational systems assimilate in that very same situation.
But let me ask you, though, about, let's just say for argument's sake this passes. What I have perceived is the issue is not ethnicity, it's not intelligence, it's access to information. It's so many of these kids just don't know, and more importantly, their parents don't know how to play the college admissions game. So you can pass this 100 times over, but without the relevant information trickling down to the parents and the ethnic child, whatever that may mean, it won't matter.
Yes, it will, because it will allow the UCs to educate the parent, to educate the student. Because right now, I'll give you an example. Let's say a community college, CSU, or the UC system wanted to do a STEM recruitment program for women to make sure you have more women that are doing math and sciences. They cannot do that under Proposition 209. If this were to pass, and if the voters allow it, then the UCs can say, okay, let's now go into these communities of color and talk to the counselors. Let's talk to the parents, and let's talk to them about recruiting their children to come to UCLA, to UC Berkeley, encouraging them.
I want to ask you about the politics of this. When I think about Proposition 187, when I think about Proposition 209, those were not fun times.
No, I agree.
I mean, it was really ugly. A lot of angst on both sides of the issue. If this goes to the ballot, we could see that again.
I agree. But, here's my thought. If I'm going to be elected and give my time to the public, I have to be willing to ask the tough questions, even if it's a controversial issue. And if the voters say no, I'll understand. But I truly believe that we need to be able to ask that question, and the electorate now is a lot different than it was back when it was passed.
What do you think the voters are going to say?
I think the voters will change their mind, and
it is California. This is a blue state.
I think the voters will change their mind because of the makeup of who we are. If they look at the issue the way it really should be looked at, I think it's time to have that discussion. Let's have it. Let's have that discussion publicly. I'm willing to have it.
Okay, so we have to see what happens in the California State Assembly. It needs to get out of the Assembly by 2/3, and then it could come to the voters. Could it be in November?
Well, it depends. If I get a vote out of the Assembly before, I think it's the end of June, then it goes in this 2014 election.
Wow.
If it goes after July 1st or 2nd, then it goes in the 2016 election.
See, when we come back, we speak with a community college trustee from Glendale, talk about her views on Latino underperformance at that level. I'm Brad Pomerance, it's Charter California Edition.
Which University of California campus has had the highest number of Latino students enrolled? Berkeley, Los Angeles, Riverside, San Diego. UC Riverside has had the greatest number of Latino students enrolled.
Welcome back to California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Anita Gabrielian. She is a trustee with the Glendale Community College District. And I'd like to speak with you about our Latino students. Okay. We know that this region educates many Latinos, and the Latino community is growing dramatically. But we also know that there still continues to be a gap between Latinos and their counterparts. A study came out recently. What can you tell us about Latinos in higher education?
Okay. It's an excellent question, and Brad, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you for having
and to talk about this important issue. And the reason I'm very grateful for the opportunity is the fact that last month, particularly, the Campaign for College Opportunity came up with a Latino higher education report card. They issued it in January, and we all knew that it was bad, that Latino students and ethnic students lag behind others in college opportunity, access, education, but not this bad.
How bad?
So I'll tell you. I'll share some statistics. Latinos have bachelor's degrees or higher at a 10.7% rate, associate degrees at 5.3%, compared with all of California, which is at 30.3% for bachelor's or higher. So that's a 20% gap.
And what's most troubling about that is that the Latino population is about 30-40% of the state and growing.
Exactly, 38%.
Right. And so if these numbers continue on the trend line that they are, California's at risk. The entire state of California is at risk.
That's exactly why it's not just a social issue. It's not just important for Latinos. It is important for everybody in the state of California.
I have to tell you, the number that most surprised me was the associates number. I would have thought the associates number would be higher.
No, isn't that something?
The associates number is only 5%, and the bachelor's number is 10%.
Exactly. So, and this is, now if you look at the associate's degree for all of California, it's 37%. So 38% of California has either an associate degree or a bachelor's degree, compared to about 16% in the Latino population. Now let me tell you, break it down just a little bit more. So 38% of California is Latino. Of our college-age students between 18 and 24, that's 48% of California.
So 48% of 18 to 24-year-olds are Latino.
Exactly.
Oh my.
So, the numbers, of course, grow as you go younger and younger. If you look at Latinos that are 18 years or less, 1 in 2 of every Californian is a Latino. So what happens, and the way the Latino community goes, so goes the state of California. As a matter of fact, if we don't do anything about it, by the year 2020, the average net income of Californians will decrease by about 11%. So
we know that a bachelor's degree can add $1 million to a lifetime of employment. I mean, that's how much more you will make if you have a bachelor's degree. $1 million.
Exactly.
And when I hear these statistics, it's crushing, because I think about how many bright, young Latinos are in our midst. And what's so crushing about it is the question of access. Let me give you a quick anecdote. My father is the child of Polish Eastern European immigrants. He was admitted to Columbia University and Brooklyn College of Pharmacy. He went to Brooklyn College of Pharmacy because his cousin went to Brooklyn College of Pharmacy. He got into an Ivy League school, but it was a question of knowledge and access. It's a common immigrant story. And I'm sure we see this today playing out with more recent immigrants. It's a miracle my father went to college, you know, but that's the point, is that what do we do when there's just a lack of information, a lack of knowledge? And that's what we're seeing here.
It is, absolutely. I have to, you know, personally, I'm an immigrant.
Right.
So, and I'm delighted that I went to a wonderful university, USC, straight on.
But that begs the question, how? How did you know?
I think I was blessed. I was blessed with my parents who were a little more knowledgeable about it and really prioritized education.
Right.
They knew, they understood that education was that great equalizer. And I think that's the type of knowledge that we have to make sure we embed in parent education early on, in elementary through high school. We also need additional funds just for counseling our students. There's so many students that graduate and they don't have they don't have the requirements for going to a CSU. Yeah, and so really one of the things I want to highlight is going back to some of the things that the Campaign for College Opportunity highlighted. Number one, of course, it's an imperative, not just a social imperative, but an economic imperative to educate the Latino student. And it's a no-brainer. In California, you invest $1 and you get $4.50 back in returns in additional income, taxes, etc. It's just economically makes sense.
So much of it is the knowledge of the parents.
Yes.
How do we educate the parents about college opportunities, about college readiness? I just, you know, a 15, 16-year-old, I don't care if they're Latino, European, whatever it is, the parents are so much of that drive.
Exactly.
And if you don't know what you don't know.
That's right.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I think that is a partnership at the school level. It is in making sure that we invest monies at the high school level, at the elementary level, on the importance of education.
Though? I mean, the days of going to community college because you couldn't make it to a college, those are gone.
Yeah,
there are plenty of people who go to community college that are bright and they are on the right path. Can Glendale Community College, can Pasadena Community College reach out to the high schools in their district?
Oh, we do that.
Right.
We absolutely do that. We have great partnerships with the unified school districts in the regions that we serve and in the surrounding regions. And I think that, you know, that responsibility is also up to those unified school districts.
It's a village, I hate to say it, you know.
It is a village. It is a village, and we're there, and that is part of our outreach efforts. But of course we need the funding. And so we are delighted, first of all, right now, with the governor's budget. The governor's budget, after Proposition 30, recognizes the importance of community colleges within the higher education system. And I want to point out that while CSU and the UC systems educate about 300,000 students in California, community colleges educate 2.5 million students. We are the highest, the largest higher education institution in the whole country.
But could one argue that Governor Brown has preferred K12 too much and that he should give even more money to 13, 14 and CSU and UC? I mean, K12, there's no question he has a soft spot for K12.
He has a soft spot for K12, and you know what? I think we all have a soft spot for K12. And as a community college trustee, I love the partnership with our unified school district. I don't want to compete with the funds that K12 is getting, because I see that it's important to have a ready student, a college-ready student when they come to our community college.
I want to thank you so much for joining us. We need to break for now. Our guest has been Anita Gabrielian. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Ana Cubas. She is looking to energize young Latinas to get involved in the public process. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
Thank you.
How many members of the United States Congress are of Latino descent? 12, 20, 28, or 35? 28 members of the 113th Congress are Latino.
Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Ana Cubas. She was close to becoming a Los Angeles City Councilwoman recently. She is now a rumored candidate for the Los Angeles Community College District. I congratulate you on your almost success with the Los Angeles City Council. It was seen as a very upstart race, and you were beaten by a well-known state senator. How did that feel, though? You got close.
It was amazing. It was only 588 votes apart, which goes to show you that every vote does count. It
absolutely does.
So voter turnout is a major issue, as you know, in municipal elections. Had we had a 10% bigger turnout, I think the results would have been different. But it was an amazing experience.
I must say, I recently interviewed a councilman from West Covina. He won his race around the same time you were running by 2 votes.
Oh, wow.
2 votes. What was so crazy is that he was sworn in before the recount was done.
Oh.
So it could have flipped, but be that as it may, but you're right, every vote counts. And that begs the question about voters and voter turnout. And you have been focused recently, well, really your whole career, but most recently, on what's known as the Latina Public Service Academy, which is looking to energize, motivate young Latinas about the electoral process, the political process, the nonprofit process. Talk to me about your program.
So this came out of my experience in my campaign, where I saw that the majority of the campaign staff, the fundraisers, even the volunteers were men, young men especially.
Interesting.
And I thought we need more women to step up to the plate and become part of the political process.
It's interesting because here in California, we have a pretty long history of successful female candidates. We have 2 female senators in the United States Senate, Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris, Attorney General. But yet, if you look at the legislature, the number of women is actually down from where it had been. And if you look at Latinas, also down a bit. I'm sure you know Christina Garcia, an assemblywoman. She has been a big proponent for pushing women and Latino women into public service. What do you see when you talk to your young women, 11th and 12th graders, who are participating in your academy?
Well, it's a process. So I've been recruiting on campuses. It's an application process, so the young ladies have to apply. The deadline is February 28th.
Okay, so you're starting, we're in it now.
It's a brand new academy, and the academy will take place in May. So what I've noticed primarily is the issue of access. So exposing these young women to these opportunities, to these possibilities that in their neighborhood, in their lives, they may not have access to. So that's a big component.
What's interesting to me is we look at Cover California, and I kind of look at that as maybe a metaphor for engagement amongst the Latino community. We know that Latinos have not been signing up in Cover California at rates commensurate with their population. And I've spoken with some folks about this, and what I often hear is that the kind of the matriarchs, the patriarchs, are a little wary of getting involved in government. They may have come from oppressive governments, and so when the matriarch and the patriarch don't want to get involved in Cover California because it's giving your information to the government, it kind of trickles down. And so is that part of the challenge when trying to engage Latinos and Latinas, that there's this fear of government involvement?
That's part of it, and that's why we're going to the young people, 11th and 12th graders, because many times they understand the language better than their parents. They become the leaders of their family. They become the translators. So when you target the younger generation, you will now see a shift, because these kids are American. They don't know any other governments. They don't know any other community.
And you mentioned translation. I know that when I was growing up, or you're younger than me, but we're probably around the same age, it was not cool for Latino kids to keep their Spanish. It was kind of, there was a push to just learn English and forget Spanish. I feel like that has changed so that Latinos are bilingual. Am I on the right track on this? Are these young Latinos and Latinas keeping their Spanish and using that as to their benefit? I mean, to be bilingual, what a gift.
Yes, it is changed. So when I came to this country, I was 10 years old from El Salvador. Didn't speak a word of English. Luckily, I had great teachers, great public school system. And I used Spanish all the time. So I kept my Spanish.
But am I right that kind of around that time it wasn't cool?
It wasn't cool because it was considered to be, oh, you're an immigrant, you're not cool enough yet. But of course, as I've gotten older, I've gotten cooler.
Why do you think that's changed? That it's now cool to be bilingual?
I think it's primarily demographics and the business environment. Companies know that they have to target this huge market, billions of dollars of consumer power. And so I really think that's the reason, the demographics and the economics.
But I want to ask you, are these younger Latinos and Latinas, are they consuming Spanish language media, English language media, both, more one than the other? I've never really known the answer to that.
Well, the younger generation is consuming English language media more than their parents, their aunts and uncles.
Because it's interesting, I'm a consumer of news, and forgive me for saying this, but I think Univision's newscast is just outstanding. I don't want to pick one or the other, but it's just outstanding. I mean, top notch. And so I wonder, I speak some Spanish, so I wonder if these younger Latinos are consuming newscasts from Univision or Telemundo or whatever it may be.
Not as much as their parents, but remember, the family still has a lot of consumer power. They make the purchases. Now, the younger generation, which is why this program is initiating, the younger generation has that opportunity to look at all the possibilities. It could be public service, politics, the private sector, and it's about leadership. Latinos are the future of the county of Los Angeles in terms of political and the state. And so if we don't empower our young Latino population, we're going to have economic issues down the road in our state.
What about building alliances and bridges between Latino communities, European communities, Asian communities, so it's not so balkanized?
Yeah, and that's part of the Academy as well, as focusing on the issue of women, the lack of representation of women. For example...
So it's not just Latinas, it's all women.
That's right. So we look at what does it mean to be a female leader. And for example, in the Los Angeles City Council, out of 18 elected positions, only one is held by a woman.
A Latina, by the way.
A Latina,
by the way, who ran against a Latina, which was interesting.
That was interesting.
In the runoff.
Now the question begs, how come you don't see African-American females on the City Council, Anglo females on the City Council? That's what we need to address, the lack of female representation in government. At the state level, women of all races and ethnicities represent only 20% of the positions, of the elected positions, even though we're half the population.
But let me ask you, and I know that you have a kind of a sweet spot for Latinas. What about Latinos? Men.
Well, men, if you look at the LA City Council, men are well represented.
Latino men.
Latino men are well represented. So if out of the 15 council districts, there are 4 or 5 Latino men that represent predominantly Latino districts.
But should we, I mean, there are a lot of academies for Latinas. What about Latinos? I mean, or is it just, it's just kind of, there's already that network there? And
it seems to me like that there is that network, that the male elected officials make it a point to groom the younger males to take their positions.
Latinos, Europeans, African-Americans, whatever it is.
Yes, whereas they do not do that for females. So we have in politics what's called the bench, meaning who's up next for which position. And if you look at who is groomed and picked to be on that bench,
pick the men?
It's the men. That's
right. Do the women pick the women?
That's the hope, and that's why we have this academy. Obviously, in City Council, that was not the case. When I started working in City Hall back in '98 as a young staffer, there were 5 female elected officials of all races and ethnicities, African American, Anglo, Latina. Actually, Gloria Molina was the last Latina that served.
Fascinating.
But the point is clearly they did not groom and put on the bench another woman to replace them.
Her name is Ana Cubas. She is with the Latina Public Service Academy. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is Charter California Edition.